The world seems to be spinning faster toward chaos as multiple crises unfold simultaneously across continents, with the eyes of global audiences trying to make sense of a complicated web of politics, uprisings, assassinations, and threats of war. Starting with the small Himalayan nation of Nepal, where what has been called the Generation Z revolution has erupted violently, as young Nepali citizens, frustrated by corruption, inequality, and censorship, have taken to the streets, stormed institutions, and even set fire to the presidential palace, tragically killing members of political families, including the wife of a former head of government, while ministers were pursued and beaten by angry crowds. All of this unfolding under the constant presence of social media, which became both a weapon of exposure and a tool of organization, as videos, selfies, and live streams documented in real time the anger of a population that had grown tired of what they saw as the arrogance and corruption of the so-called Nepo kids, the children of political and judicial elites flaunting luxury cars, designer clothes like Louis Vuitton and Cartier, and extravagant lifestyles online, while millions of ordinary citizens could not find jobs or even basic health care, fueling a generational rage, especially among the young aged roughly 16 to 30 who felt excluded from opportunity, stripped of their digital voice as the government cracked down on social media platforms, under the pretext of fighting fake news, and left with no other option but to protest making. Nepal, a new chapter in how digital native generations channel frustration into political upheaval, reminiscent of the Arab Spring but intensified by today's hyper-connected environment. While in a different corner of the world, another shock came with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, one of the most visible conservative influencers in the United States, a figure with over 14 million followers across platforms, known for his support of the MAGA movement and his confrontational style of public debate, often setting up tables at universities to challenge opponents and stream the encounters online, making him both loved and hated, a polarizing voice who had opposed gun restrictions, questioned pandemic measures, rejected climate change narratives, and called for transparency during the 2020 election, while encouraging protests during Biden's inauguration, leading critics to accuse him of helping incite the January 6th Capitol unrest, yet who, despite controversy, embodied for millions of conservatives a champion of free speech and resistance against what they saw as liberal overreach, and whose assassination during a campus event in Utah shook American politics, prompting Donald Trump to accuse radical leftists of fostering a culture of hatred and violence, declaring that the United States is now living through one of its darkest moments in history, while Democrats pointed back to Kirk and Trump as instigators of dangerous rhetoric themselves, exposing once again the deep fractures in America's political and cultural landscape, where free speech, the First Amendment, and the boundaries of acceptable political discourse are under intense scrutiny, raising fears that such violence could escalate further as the nation approaches critical elections. But as domestic politics boil in the United States, the Middle East faces its own dangerous flashpoint, with Qatar, a controversial actor playing both sides, hosting the largest U.S. military base in the region, while simultaneously maintaining ties to Hamas and other Islamist groups, now declaring openly through its Prime Minister al-Thani that it will attack Israel in retaliation for recent strikes that targeted Hamas figures inside Qatari territory, strikes ordered by Benjamin Netanyahu under the justification of combating terrorism, comparing his policy to the post-9/11 Bush doctrine, in which any state harboring terrorists became a legitimate military target, yet failing in this particular operation to eliminate Hamas leaders, sparking fury in Doha, where officials accused Israel of violating sovereignty, breaching international law, and sabotaging delicate negotiations over with Qatar now coordinating with Arab allies such as Saudi Arabia and possibly Turkey to prepare retaliation, a development that risks spiraling into a wider Arab-Israeli confrontation, while voices across the region, including Iran, have expressed support for Qatar's anger, raising the specter of yet another devastating Middle Eastern war, one that could draw in great powers and destabilize already fragile alliances. And this crisis coincides with intensifying tensions in Europe, where Poland has reported that 19 Russian drones, some believed to be Shahed models used by Moscow in Ukraine, crossed into its territory, prompting Warsaw to call an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council and to invoke NATO consultations under Article 4, warning that Europe is closer to a large-scale armed conflict than at any point since World War II, with Prime Minister Donald Tusk declaring that the alliance must respond decisively, while Russia officially denied involvement, with Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov dismissing the accusations as Western propaganda and insisting that Russian drones do not have the range to hit Poland, suggesting instead that it was either a false flag operation or disinformation designed to escalate tensions, a claim rejected by Polish authorities, who pointed to physical drone debris as evidence, leaving analysts to wonder whether Vladimir Putin is testing NATO's resolve with provocative actions, while maintaining plausible deniability, a risky gamble that could trigger a chain reaction if miscalculated, since any confirmed Russian strike on Poland, a NATO member, could legally justify a collective military response under Article 5, something Moscow would surely wish to avoid, yet the ambiguity. Europe on edge, fueling calls for stronger sanctions and military readiness. And as if these crises were not enough, Asia adds another layer with South Korea's outrage over the detention of nearly 500 of its engineers by U.S. immigration authorities, workers linked to massive industrial projects by companies like Hyundai, Samsung, and LG, who were in the U.S. under what Seoul insists were legal temporary visas as part of multi-billion-dollar investments to build manufacturing plants, but who were nevertheless detained, creating diplomatic friction and prompting South Korea's president to warn that such treatment creates legal uncertainty and may reduce future investments in the American economy, undermining the very reindustrialization goals Washington has been promoting, with critics accusing U.S. authorities of an overly aggressive stance on immigration that may alienate close allies, potentially harming strategic partnerships in both technology and defense. A reminder that even between long-standing allies, missteps can trigger mistrust at sensitive times. And so, from the burning palaces of Kathmandu to the assassination debates in Washington, from Qatari threats against Israel to Russian drones over Poland and South Korean engineers detained in the U.S., the world feels increasingly entangled in crises that are local in origin but global in consequence, weaving together themes of generational anger, free speech, sovereignty, security, and economic cooperation, all under the shadow of potential escalation into larger conflicts, leaving citizens everywhere to wonder whether leaders will find ways to de-escalate or whether these scattered sparks are converging into a firestorm that could engulf international order in the months ahead, making vigilance, understanding, and awareness more essential than ever in a moment where history seems to accelerate and the margin for error grows thinner by the day.